Please.
And of course, I'll give my presentation in Danish. So, no, sorry. But obviously, later today we'll be talking about more about the future. And so, if you sort of play the role of the ghost of Christmas futures, Camilla had the role of the ghost of Christmas past, the research. So I am the ghost of Christmas present. So in this case, of course, we went exploring to build a good practices guide, and that's of course what I'm going to tell you some more about. But allow me then to just briefly take you through, and I click there. No, well, no, sorry. Hey. On the Danish Committee for Health Education, an NGO that deals with health issues that are normally and often a little bit like the picture you see here. Interconnected strands that are difficult to really use for anything. They are twisted, not necessarily in a ethical way, but they are tricky to follow maybe, and they're also, even though you want to use them for a lot of good measures, they can be tricky to solve unless you do something like this, where you use the different elements to create aesthetics, structure, usability, of course. The two are, of course, in a metaphorical way, exactly the same. But once you apply creativity and aesthetics, you can suddenly use this for a good measure. So that's what we try to do in the Danish Committee for Health Education. We use that in multiple approaches, some of them on an individual level for mentalization and for chronic disease self-management. We do that in group level, sometimes, for instance, at mental health in workplaces. My colleague Maria can also, of course, share some more about what some of my colleagues in the DCHE does. And group-based initiatives in schools, for instance, tackling mental health literacy even before they have mental health problems. And structurally, and something that we call the Togetherness City to fight, for instance, for inclusion and against loneliness and social values. And for instance, and this is cancer related, in something called the FC Prostate, a league of Danish football teams for prostate patients. Who wants to be the poor, struggling patient? Nobody. Who wants to be a famous football player? A lot of people. So creating identity by giving a joint peer support group, obviously these are men. I have yet to see a woman with prostate cancer, but it gives them identity. It gives them a lot of community. It gives them an opportunity, especially for men, to talk about issues that are tough in a peer setting. But it has to have an aesthetic, creative use for them to identify and to find it useful. So, in cancer, the Good Practices Guide in many ways here and for the eHealth for Cancer project is by boosting the digital potential, which is clearly there, as the Ghost of Christmas Past just showed, but it's not really been delivered to the full extent that it can. But by studying the existing digital landscape, we want to do more about how to do that. So allow me here to share what we've been doing with the Good Practices Guide, how we did it, the findings that we had, and the future steps in front of us. That's where you come in, of course. And the what is, of course, then when we talk about the digital health ecosystem, there's a lot of different elements on digital health that one should consider in the entire landscape. A lot of them are not necessarily very useful for the patient in the sense that they have access to it. The electronic health record is a wonderful system mostly for the running of the system, but is not necessarily the same as, of course, gaining access to it as a patient would be good, but it's not necessarily a tool meant for the patient per se. And the same, of course, goes to some of the reimbursement systems. The better the digital systems are able to do the digital reimbursement, wonderful, fine, but it's still not necessarily what drives health literacy, not what drives empowerment. It doesn't necessarily drive quality of life for the patients. So in this particular context, what we've looked at is, of course, the mHealth solutions that are there, the digital literacy, health literacy solutions of various kinds that are there, the social networks that might be used somehow in a strategic way, and the different telehealth solutions as well. And then what we did was consider how can this good practices guide do stuff. Well, first of all, by recognizing that it is a guide. It is not, well, in this case, it is not the truth. It is a guide to stimulate something, a guide that takes you by the hand, hopefully, or at least leads you the way, takes you by the hand and leads you to do stuff. And what is that stuff? Well, it's of course practices, which is practice. It is not theoretical. It's about the practices, what people are doing on the day-to-day basis. And while, I mean, the literature review that Camilla just shared is a wonderful case, at least a lot of them, of what could be done. But it's not necessarily the same, or things that has been done also, but not necessarily what's going on. What are people really doing? You might say that some of the good practices are what survived in some cases, or at least waiting to die also. But still, it's things that are done in practice, what people are doing, really using. But what are they using it for? Well, it's the good one. It's not about best practices. We're trying to support an upcoming generation of the use of digital tools, and expecting them to be perfect and ideal to begin with would be a really tough requirement. But they can be good. They can be good at promoting health literacy. They can be good at promoting empowerment. They can be good at doing stuff. So we're asking people, we have asked people, to come up with the good practices that they found good, that they liked, without necessarily having the requirement to say that these were the best ones to win in the digital landscape. And this is a very useful tool to enable that this is a guide that helps you to be inspired to do more, do something practical, and just to have the idea that it might be good without necessarily requiring of you or your institution that it has to be the best. It just have to be better than the alternative, at least. So, what we wanted to do, of course, we want to find the path to that future, the ghost of the CRISPR future, but we have to understand the present. And it takes a little bit of peering into the labyrinth to understand what we're doing. It calls a little bit for interpretation, because we don't know the future that we are looking at. We have indications of what digital tools might do, and we have some kind of experiences of what we have done with the tools previously, but we can't know necessarily, unless we try, what will be the outcome of implementing specific tools. I really love the fact you had with Camilla here, says there's little research into how health literacy can be supported by digital tools. There are also quite few digital tools that support health literacy. So which is the chicken and which is the egg? What happened if we tried? We wouldn't be able to say based on research, sadly, because we don't have the research to support it. But we could try, based on the basic idea that we believe that people can do stuff. We have a couple of thousand years of history that shows that people can do stuff. So maybe they can do it if we support it by building the right tools. But that calls for interpretation as well. So the how was to explore and gather in Greece, Italy, and Denmark. Geographical focus of the literature review was wider, but we limited in ourselves to the practices in these three countries. And then looked into different types of stakeholders, the clinical side, the patient organizations, and the developer side. And then had semi-structured interviews with partners from each of these stakeholder types in each of these countries to ask them what they saw, what they used, what they thought about them, and what they hoped for based on that. And these are our wonderful explorers. You've seen them sort of before. So based on these, we had 10 interviews with national experts from European ecosystems in cancer care. digital types, either the clinical side, the patient organization side, or developers that wanted it. We gathered more than 50 different practices or cases and got then, of course, feedback on the actual digital practices in 3 different countries with a, well, fairly high variety across regions and organizations. And these findings, when digging through it all, what we found essentially is there is an awful lot of fragmentation. Yes, you do have a hell of a lot, in this case 50 different tools. They are very rarely interconnected. They are not necessarily built on a structured or strategized approach, neither regionally or nationally. You have developers fighting left and right. You have regional or national authorities coming up with different tools. You have clinical partners, sometimes a hospital, sometimes a clinic, and sometimes a region, coming up with solutions to try to do something for these cancer patients. In Denmark, we have 5 different regions, and we have, of course, different hospitals in these regions. Some of the regions are thinking connectedly, but not with the other regions. Why would they? Or they are coming up with different solutions based on a clinic-by-clinic base with their speciality, their cancer speciality, but not necessarily in a way that might support the carer. Who knew that the patient would have a family? So there's an awful lot of fragmentation here. There's a lot of productivity in terms of building new tools, but they're not interconnected. So it leads also for the users to a lot of confusion. The tools do not talk together, and there might be, as a cancer patient or as a carer, the need to access 3, 4, 5 different types of tools, and they're not talking to each other. That leads perhaps to more confusion than actually a digital potential or the digital potential. A second finding is the sustainability issues. There are good projects, there are good initiatives out there that build digital tools to solve certain issues. But once they run out of money, either on the development side or the continued running of the system slowly, sometimes it manages to survive for as long as the digital ecosystem would support it. Anyone that has built an app either for the Apple store or for the Android store knows that a system update from either system would often kill your app, so you have to continuously update the app. And that is one of the challenges, that it is not just about the initial investment, it is also about the continued investment in sometimes new features and sometimes in system updates that are needed for these systems to run. It means then that good systems sometimes, well, they die, even though they actually delivered value. But they were not necessarily funded by anything. It didn't have any kind of business model attached to it. And of course, this being within the health system, unless you have a reimbursement model, and most countries do not, the digital side are trying to fight based on the fuel fumes that it can find in different projects instead. And then there's the last, digging through it all, solving what for who. The cancer is often within a human being. So one could assume that some of these digital tools would also do something to help the people, the individual. But it's not. It's often to try to fix perhaps a staffing issue in a hospital, or it's to fix a clinical pathway, which is of course good as well. But it is often the system that thinks, oh, a digital tool might make our job easier, which is nice, cool, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the digital tool takes the perspective of the patient that needs to use these different tools into perspective, or a different vulnerable group, the clinicians, that also needs to integrate this digital practice into their clinical day-to-day lives. a lot of, whether we're talking about GPs or nurses or doctors, they have not signed up to become digital doctors. That was not what they trained for. But we are slowly, and without giving them more time necessarily, trying to push them into a use of more digital tools that they are not the best at. And it is very important to realize that even though you might be extremely knowledgeable on cancer, it doesn't mean that you have a high digital health literacy in using digital cancer tools. The two do not connect. And neither does that mean that it's true that just because you have a cancer, that you are cancer digital health literate. We do tend to recognize that with patients, but the same is also true for clinicians. So, to summarize for the fragmentation, it also means that more is not better. It is not because we need, per se, more tools. If only we had twice as many digital tools, things would look better. No, we would probably just have an even more fragmentation. We would have an even bigger labyrinth. Then things has to be interconnected, either across sectors, across borders, across authorities, for more to mean something that is actually meaningful in terms of quality. And currently, of course, what you do have is little strategy on neither at a national level or a European level. So there is a risk that a digital strategy that says, here's €100 million, go do some more digital tools, it will just lead to more chaos. You have to have the step before that says, we have the strategy, you should do so and so and so. We need these tools before we have these tools. We need training maybe before we actually implement a lot of new tools. So more does not equal better. And be careful then maybe also, that's the message from the present, going into the future, to assume that if only we had more money to build more tools, we would have better. Unless we fix a system, fix a way to have more tools surviving and have more tools to be integrated, more will not necessarily mean better. And then the sustainability issue. Well, the cost of building them is often lower than the cost to develop and extend. Or maybe you think that it's boring, or there's a new politician. I'm not pointing at anyone specifically, but the decision to want to develop an existing platform, to extend an existing platform, is tricky, whether you have a national funded system, one that's funded by the EU, or one that's funded by a very benign foundation of any kind. They are really loath often to invest in expansion of an existing platform. But something new and shiny, that's exciting. But it adds to this problem. We need also to figure out a way to be better at recognizing the value of building in existing platforms instead of just building a new one. There are, of course, new technological elements coming online. The use of AI was not there 5 years ago, so obviously you couldn't build your tool based on AI. That's an evolution that one needs to consider. But if we have then included the AI and then go back to the same old stupid business model of throwing systems that work out the window because we ran out of funding, then we're in the same mess, AI or not. It leads, again, to a loss of experience. It leads to a loss of experience on the developer side. You may have been involved in building a wonderful digital tool for cancer care, and you now know a lot about what people are passionate about and so on, but you ran out of funding and suddenly you need a different job. It leads to a loss of experience on the developer side. It leads to a loss of experience also on the procurer side, because they had a tool before and now they got a new tool, and the two uses a different methodology and they can't really. So how do we really engage with these different types of tools so that it actually has an add-on in terms of experience over time? And then there's also a generational gap to consider as well. In 15, I can't remember the exact year, sorry, I should have looked at that, but Gutenberg, of course, invented the printing press. Suddenly we knew how to print books, and reading was wonderful. Before that, well, we tended to tell each other stories. Well, we weren't always sitting by the campfire, but bear with me. Sitting by the campfire and listening to stories. And in a digital age, people are using, of course, audiovisual means, Instagram, TikTok, others, to access information. You have an awful lot of users below the age of 25 that wouldn't go on a text-based website to access information. No, instead they go to the the Instagram. They go to find stories, the way that human beings appreciate information sharing by another human being. So it means that our website, our text-based websites, are in a way running out of its lease on life, because it doesn't really support the way that a lot of younger generations are using information sharing. And by the way, when we try to use these, if you will, simpler audiovisual means, it often actually also leads to a better understanding by older generations, because they can actually access the information better. You see an enormous amount of people that are accessing YouTube, Instagram, TikTok to figure out how to cook their next meal, how to rebuild their home, how to do cancer. Oh, well, there was actually one. There's an awful lot of potential in building these different types of tools if we use audiovisual means. How many European countries and authorities do have a strategy for doing audiovisual information sharing? So far, not that many. So this is a generational gap. Text-based information sharing, books, websites, so on, was a wonderful tool. It might not just be the one that we should continually aim for, because animations, videos, and so on are really good at delivering what we need. So in trying to fix that as well. Yeah, well, it leads to a low adaptability, because that is an emerging digital culture. The solving of the what for who, well, there's a high focus on treatment. You have so and so many people standing in queue. We want to lead to a better quality of treatment. Yes, indeed, that's wonderful. We should increase the quality of treatment. But focusing on better digital tools for treatment doesn't prevent a single cancer case, or at least very few. The number of patients that get 2 cancers are limited. Well, that's good. But what we also need is, of course, to utilize some of these tools, and that's where the health literacy side comes into play, to utilize some of these on healthy people. Healthy people that would like to know more about how to lead a healthy life, that would have a lifestyle that where we motivate them and talk about the wonders of a lifestyle that leads to a lower incidence of cancer. We don't build many of those cancer tools, digital tools. We build treatment-focused tools because they are tools for the system, the disease care system. And that's, of course, one of the elements that some of our digital tools, not all of them, but some of them, please dear ghost of Christmas future, should be built for the ones that are healthy, so that we can prevent some of these cancers and also get them to understand, because that's needed too, what it means to have a cancer, because that is also a story that we need to share. There are very few tools for carers, very few tools to boost health literacy. So that is on my Christmas wish list, that there might be more of those. So are we just lost in a digital labyrinth? Well, no. yay, we have a path forward. We have created this wonderful, via this shared QR code that takes you to the good practices guide. Yay. That then looks into this, that lights a possible path for research for a practice that considers some of the barriers that people experience, that try to integrate users of all kinds. New digital tools has to be really good for either the end user that's a clinician, the end user that's a patient, the end user that's a carer. It's not to be best for the hospital CEO. I mean, he or she is on the list too. But initially, the value of these digital tools has to be for the benefit of the user, the patient, and the people around that particular person. And one that reflects the existing digital health literacy, meaning that unless you also take into account that the digital health literacy of the users means something about the level to which they can use the digital tools, you might completely miss. And it's not because they are stupid, slow, should have had a course in engineering or whatever. Blaming the victims in this case is not going to solve the digital potential. It has to take into account the existing digital health literacy. And without, well, my mother can't hear me talk right now, but it took a long time for my mother to learn to write her first text message. It took a useful system. Well, you know the drift. It was when she got her first iPhone, of course. But my point, though, is, of course, that for 15, 20 years before, she was struggling to find out how to program the VCR system to record something. She was struggling to send a text message via a Nokia phone because it wasn't very user-friendly. But suddenly they had a user-friendly system, and she could then be a digital native too. And this is one to respect the existing digital health literacy of the people is important if you want them to use it. Nowadays, of course, she uses Facebook too much, but that's a different story. But I would encourage you to download the Good Practices Guide for those purposes, to let it be a guide that inspires you to do more, to study the practices that are actually there, whether they can use the actual tool or not, and of course that it's okay, that it's just good. We are going on a path towards a future, and we definitely want to be the best practices at some point. But we're still fairly young when it comes to digital tools, so it's okay that it's just good practices, and let's at least go forward towards some better practices in the future. So, thank you.